In the autumn of 1947, a young naval lieutenant named Philip Mountbatten, a name he had adopted only weeks earlier, walked into Westminster Abbey and married the woman who would become Queen of England. The newspapers said he had sacrificed so much. They pointed to his renunciation of foreign titles, his adoption of British citizenship, his decision to exchange a royal heritage for a supporting role beside his wife. They were looking at the wrong ledger. Philip had been born a Prince of Greece and Denmark on 10 June 1921 at the Villa Mon Repos on the island of Corfu. On the dining room table, as multiple accounts have it, including the family's own records and Philip Eade's 2011 biography, Young Prince Philip, the definitive account of his early life. Before his second birthday, his family was driven from the country. He was 18 months old when the Royal Navy light cruiser HMS Calypso evacuated him from Corfu in December 1922, reportedly carrying the infant in a cot improvised from a fruit box. His father had just been sentenced to perpetual banishment by a military tribunal. The family had no home, no income, and no country. Over the following years, his mother would be placed in a Swiss sanatorium, his father would settle into a diminished exile at the Metropole Hotel in Monte Carlo, and the boy would move between borrowed houses in Paris, London, and the Scottish Highlands, educated on other people's money in other people's institutions. The Al Jazeera obituary, published 9 April 2021, credited Philip with having made personal sacrifices to support the Queen. The BBC, the broadsheets, and the Poet Laureate all reached for the same register: duty, service, sacrifice. Over 540 pages of print coverage appeared in British national newspapers by the Monday following his death, and the word that ran through all of it was the same one. The audience that watched those tributes noticed the gap. The most liked comment on one of the major Philip documentaries was blunt: "I don't believe Prince Philip sacrificed anything to marry QE2. The second: "Philip had nothing to sacrifice. He was skint, really broke." They weren't being cruel. They were doing arithmetic the obituaries had skipped. This is that arithmetic. Corfu, June 1921. The Villa Mon Repos sits on a wooded promontory on the island's western coast, a neoclassical building surrounded by gardens that drop toward the Ionian Sea. It was here that Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark and his wife, Princess Alice of Battenberg, were waiting out a precarious moment in Greek political history. Their fifth child arrived on the dining room table, confirmed by Philip Eade's own research, as noted in The Guardian's review of his biography. The baby was baptized Philippos Andreou in the Greek Orthodox rite at St. George's Church in the Old Fortress in Corfu. His godparents included his cousin George, Crown Prince of Greece, and his uncle Lord Louis Mountbatten. He was a prince of two royal houses simultaneously, Greek, through his father's line, and Danish, through the Glucksburg dynasty that had been supplying monarchs to both countries since 1863. On paper, he was in the line of succession to both thrones. On the ground, both thrones were already wobbling. Greece had been at war with Turkey since 1919, attempting to hold a coastal strip of western Anatolia that the post-war peace settlement had assigned to it. By August 1922, the campaign had become a catastrophe. The Greek army collapsed. The Turkish forces retook Smyrna. The military officers who had prosecuted the war turned on the government that had sent them. In September 1922, the Army-Navy revolt forced King Constantine I to abdicate. A revolutionary military government took power, and it needed someone to blame. The prosecution took shape in the Trial of the Six, a military tribunal that tried General Hatzianestis, the Army's commanding officer, along with 5 senior politicians, and executed all 6 of them in November 1922. Philip's father, Prince Andrew, commanded a Greek army division during the campaign. He was arrested in December 1922 and brought before the same court. The charges were disobedience and abandoning his post. The sentence was perpetual banishment from Greece, and deprivation of rank. Princess Alice appealed to British relatives. King George V ordered a Royal Navy vessel to evacuate the family from Corfu. HMS Calypso made the crossing in December 1922. According to the official royal website, and confirmed by Eade's research as noted in The Guardian, the infant was carried aboard in a cot made from an orange box. Eade presents the story soberly and concludes it's true, though it rests on biographical tradition rather than a naval log. The fruit box, and this is the detail that survives because it's so bluntly illustrative, was what passed for a royal cradle when the royal family had been expelled with no provisions for the journey. Philip was 18 months old. He didn't remember any of it, but the record of what happened would shape everything that followed. The family settled in the Paris suburb of Saint-Cloud, in a house lent to them by Philip's aunt, Princess Marie Bonaparte, a wealthy woman connected to Freud, who owned the property and had no immediate need of it. This was the first borrowed house. It wouldn't be the last. Philip Eade's biography makes the pattern plain. From the time of the Corfu exile, the family never had their own home. Philip and his parents and 4 sisters lived sequentially in the houses of relatives across Europe. When he was sent to Britain in 1930, he came under the care of his maternal grandmother, Princess Victoria of Hesse, who lived at Kensington Palace. He attended Cheam Preparatory School in Surrey. School holidays meant Kensington Palace or, later, Linden Manor in Bray, Berkshire, the country house of his uncle George Mountbatten, 2nd Marquess of Milford Haven, who became his primary guardian in 1930. That year, the family fractured completely. Princess Alice suffered a severe mental breakdown. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia and admitted to the Bellevue Sanatorium in Kreuzlingen, Switzerland, where the director Ludwig Binswanger consulted with Sigmund Freud on her case. Hugo Vickers' biography, Alice, Princess Andrew of Greece, published in 2000, documents this in detail. Vickers notes that Philip wasn't clearly told where his mother had gone and experienced her disappearance as a sudden absence that lasted through his entire childhood and adolescence. Prince Andrew, separated from his wife, drifted south to Monte Carlo. He became a regular at the Metropole Hotel and the Monte Carlo Casino, living what sources describe as an aimless and relatively modest existence, not destitute, but dependent on wealthy relatives, without income, without purpose, and without his son. He and Philip didn't see each other after 1939. Andrew died in Monte Carlo in 1944. Philip was 9 years old when both parents effectively vanished from his life in the same year. Speaking to a biographer decades later, he described it with the flatness of a man who had been trained by experience not to dwell. It's simply what happened. The family broke up. My mother was ill, my sisters were married, my father was in the south of France. I just had to get on with it. You do. One does. In 1933, he was sent to Schule Schloss Salem in Germany, the progressive school run by Kurt Hahn on the Baden family estate. His sister Theodora had married Berthold, Margrave of Baden, and as the Wikipedia article on Philip notes plainly, Salem had the advantage of saving school fees, since it was owned by his brother-in-law's family. He stayed for 2 terms. Then Hahn, a Jewish educator, fled Nazi persecution, crossed to Scotland, and founded Gordonstown in Morayshire in 1934. Philip followed him. He was one of only 21 students when the school opened. Someone paid the fees at Gordonstown. The specific payer isn't documented by name in the available sources, but the consensus across biographies is that the costs were covered by his British Battenberg and Mountbatten relatives. He had no money of his own. His parents had none. He was a prince entirely dependent on the charity of his extended family, moved around Europe like an item that needed storing, attending schools because someone else was willing to cover the bill. His 4 sisters, Margarita, Theodora, Cecilia, and Sophie, had all married German aristocrats by this point. The marriages are historical fact. Their political implications require precision. Margarita married Gottfried of Hohenlohe-Langenburg. Theodora married Berthold of Baden. Sophie married Prince Christoph of Hesse. Christoph held rank in the SS, was a member of the Nazi Party, and worked in the Reich Air Ministry. The scholarly literature, Jonathan Petropoulos's Royals and the Reich, Susan Ronald's Hitler's Aristocrats, addresses the Hesse family directly, naming Christoph. Cecilia, the third sister, died in a plane crash in 1937 before the wedding. She and her husband were both members of the Nazi Party. Philip served in the Royal Navy throughout the Second World War against Germany. He was present at the Battle of Cape Matapan, mentioned in dispatches for his control of HMS Valiant searchlights during a night engagement. He devised the plan during the Sicily invasion that saved HMS Wallace from German aircraft by launching a raft with smoke floats to decoy the bombers away from the damaged vessel. He was decorated. He was on the right side. The sisters' marriages complicate the family picture. They don't change Philip's own record. What they do, in 1947, is clarify his position. When he married Princess Elizabeth on 20 November 1947, the wedding at Westminster Abbey was attended by over 2,000 guests, heads of state, royalty from across Europe, the full weight of the British establishment. None of his 3 surviving sisters were there. So soon after the war, the presence of German married princesses with Nazi-aligned husbands was considered politically unacceptable. His mother, Princess Alice, attended. His father was 3 years dead. He entered the most significant marriage of his life with no family of his own in the room. He had first seen Elizabeth in July 1939 at the Royal Naval College in Dartmouth. He was 18, a cadet completing his training. She was 13, accompanying her parents, King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, on a royal visit. Marion Crawford, the princess's governess, was the primary witness to the meeting, and her account became the foundation for every subsequent telling. Crawford noted that some of the king's advisors didn't think him good enough for her. He was a prince without a home or kingdom. That assessment is the most precise description of Philip's position in 1939. It came from advisors who were trying to discourage the match. They began corresponding during the war. By 1946, Philip was asking King George VI for his daughter's hand. The king granted the request, with the condition that any formal announcement be delayed until Elizabeth's 21st birthday the following April. Lord Louis Mountbatten, Philip's great-uncle, the man who had stepped into the guardian role after George Milford Haven died of bone marrow cancer in April 1938, had been actively promoting the match. Multiple biographies describe Mountbatten's role in engineering the courtship, identifying the war as the opportunity to advance his great-nephew's position. The outcome was undeniable. Mountbatten positioned his penniless great-nephew for the most advantageous marriage available to anyone in Europe. On 28 February 1947, Philip was naturalized as a British subject. The London Gazette, issue 37908, recorded his oath of allegiance. He adopted the surname Mountbatten, the anglicized form of his mother's Battenberg family name. He formally renounced his Greek and Danish royal titles and his succession rights to both thrones. These are the items that the sacrifice narrative rests on. They deserve examination. His Greek succession position. Philip was in the line of succession to the Greek throne, but his branch, his father's branch, had been formally disgraced and exiled in 1922. The monarchy had been restored by referendum in November 1946, barely 4 months before Philip's naturalization. The practical probability of a man from an exiled, discredited branch of the Greek royal family ever ascending to a throne he had been carried away from in a fruit box wasn't nothing, but it was close. His Danish succession rights. Hereditary, real on paper, utterly remote in practice. The Danish throne ran through the reigning branch. Philip wasn't in any realistic line. His style, Prince of Greece and Denmark. A genuine royal title, but one he couldn't use in Britain, couldn't fund, and couldn't exercise. It was a designation attached to a position that had expelled him before he could speak. What he gave up was a name he could no longer use, a nationality attached to a country that had banished his father, and theoretical succession claims to thrones his family had not occupied for a quarter century. In exchange, he received, on the morning of 20th November 1947, the titles Duke of Edinburgh, Earl of Marianeth, and Baron Greenwich. He received the style His Royal Highness, which he had not held before. He had been made a Knight of the Garter the day before. He would receive, via the civil list, public funding for his role as the husband of the heir presumptive and later of the monarch herself. He received Clarence House. He received Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, Balmoral, and Sandringham. He received the security, the staff, and the institutional apparatus of the most durable monarchy in the world. The man who arrived in Britain as a teenager with a naval uniform and no kingdom left the altar of Westminster Abbey as the Duke of Edinburgh. He was brilliant and difficult, and, by most accounts, genuinely hard to contain within a role that gave him no formal constitutional authority and no clear function. That tension is documented. He didn't hide it. The most frequently quoted line from his marriage, "I am the only man in the country not allowed to give his name to his own children," captures the specific wound. When Elizabeth acceded in February 1952, following the death of King George VI, the royal house remained the House of Windsor. Philip's children wouldn't carry the name Mountbatten. It took until 1960 and a separate royal declaration for the Queen to resolve it partially. Descendants not bearing royal titles would use the surname Mountbatten-Windsor. Philip had been making the argument for 8 years before a compromise was reached. His naval career ended in 1952 when Elizabeth became queen. He left active service having reached the rank of commander and having commanded the frigate HMS Magpie. He acknowledged, in a 2011 BBC interview, that giving up the Navy carried a genuine cost, a hint of regret in his own carefully calibrated phrasing. It's the most substantiated sacrifice in the record. He was a capable officer in a service he had chosen and excelled in, and the accession ended that permanently. He built the Duke of Edinburgh's award in part, academic analysis suggests, to create a domain of his own, a project that bore his name and operated under his direction, independent of the palace's constitutional constraints. The scheme, launched in 1956, grew to involve over 275,000 young people annually in the UK alone, and expanded to 60 countries. It was the clearest expression of his own institutional instincts applied outside the gilded restrictions of consortship. Rumors about his private life circulated throughout the marriage and persist in the biographical literature. Hélène Corday, born Hélène Foufouni, a Greek-French entertainer who had known Philip in Paris during the exile years, is the most frequently cited name. Philip was godfather to her children. She published a memoir, Born Bewildered, in 1961. Multiple biographers have noted the rumor. None has produced evidence beyond proximity and speculation. It exists, it's unproven. Giles Brandreth's Philip, the Final Portrait, published the year of his death, treats it as such. What the marriage undeniably gave him was security, status, and a position that no amount of royal birth, charm, or naval competence could have generated from the starting point of 1947. He entered that marriage with an officer's pay and a borrowed identity. He left it, 74 years and 4 children later, as the longest-serving royal consort in British history. Prince Philip died on 9th of April 2021 at Windsor Castle, aged 99. The official cause of death, recorded on the death certificate, was old age. The national mourning procedure, called Operation Forth Bridge, named after the bridge near Edinburgh, the city of his dukedom, was activated. The tenor bell of Westminster Abbey rang once a minute for 99 minutes that evening. 5 months later, on 16th of September 2021, Sir Andrew Macfarlane, President of the Family Division of the High Court of England and Wales, handed down a ruling in the case re. The will of His late Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, citation 2021 EWHC 77, FAM. The hearing had been held in private in July 2021. Media organizations had not been permitted to make submissions. The ruling ordered Philip's will sealed for 90 years. Macfarlane published a written judgment, which he noted was unusual. He stated that future applications of this kind would be handled entirely in private. The will itself, he confirmed, had been executed on 5th of June 2013. He had not seen its contents. His stated rationale drew on a convention dating to 1910, when Queen Mary petitioned for her brother Prince Francis of Teck's will to be sealed. Prince Francis had left some of Queen Mary's emeralds to his mistress, and the family wanted the scandal buried. The convention held. By 2021, Macfarlane held a safe containing more than 30 sealed royal wills, including those of the Queen Mother and Princess Margaret. The convention's legal basis is Rule 58 of the Non-Contentious Probate Rules 1987, which allows the court to disapply the usual public inspection requirement where disclosure would be undesirable or inappropriate. Macfarlane applied it. His reasoning, quoted directly from the published judgment, "There is a need to enhance the protection afforded to truly private aspects of the lives of this limited group of individuals, in order to maintain the dignity of the sovereign and close members of her family." And further, "There is no true public interest in the public knowing this wholly private information," distinguishing carefully between legitimate public interest and what he called merely public curiosity. The Queen's solicitor had argued for a seal of 125 years. Macfarlane ruled that 90 years was proportionate and sufficient. He didn't specify whether the clock ran from the date of death, the grant of probate, or the September 2021 judgment itself. This is what we know. A man who arrived in Britain in 1939 with a naval uniform, no country and no personal fortune, died in 2021 with a will substantive enough to require a high court order to protect it. The size of the estate is unknown. The nature of the assets is unknown. The distribution of whatever he accumulated across 74 years of access to the resources of the British Crown will remain unknown until sometime in the next century. Philip's solicitor, the Attorney General, the keeper of the Royal Archives, and the personal representatives of the deceased will open the envelope in approximately 90 years. No one else will see it. The story the world was told is that Prince Philip gave up a kingdom of his own to stand behind his wife. The story the record tells is smaller and stranger. A boy was born on a dining table in Corfu on 10 June 1921. Before his second birthday, he was carried off the island aboard a Royal Navy warship, reportedly in a fruit box improvised as a cot, while his father was sentenced to lifetime exile. He grew up in borrowed houses: St. Cloud, Kensington Palace, Linden Manor, Gordonstown, on borrowed money, in borrowed countries, without a settled home of his own until he was in his mid-20s. His mother spent his childhood in a Swiss sanatorium. His father spent it at the Monte Carlo casino. His sisters married into a German aristocracy that several of them aligned with the Nazi regime and weren't permitted to attend his wedding in 1947. Marion Crawford, the royal governess who watched him at Dartmouth in 1939, recorded that the king's advisors considered him a prince without a home or kingdom. In February 1947, he renounced a Greek succession position he had been exiled from since infancy, a Danish hereditary title he could never exercise, and a name attached to a country that had banished his father for life. He became Philip Mountbatten, British subject. The London Gazette recorded it in issue 37908. 9 months later, he was the Duke of Edinburgh. He was brilliant, and by most accounts, genuinely difficult. A proud man with real ability who spent 5 decades in a role that offered him deference without authority, titles without function, and public scrutiny without constitutional standing. He chafed at it. He built his own domains within it. He served with a ferocity that the obituaries, for once, got right. None of that contradicts the arithmetic. He gave up a name he could no longer use. He gained the rest. And when he died, a court ordered his will locked away for 90 years, which tells you, better than any obituary, exactly how much he understood about what he had won. Subscribe for more stories like this.